The Union Pacific thundered westward through the dying light of a June afternoon, its iron wheels singing a lonesome song against steel rails that stretched toward the Montana Territory like ribbons of broken promises. Eleanor Hayes sat rigid in the third-class car, her worn carpet bag clutched between her knees, watching the landscape transform from the green hills of the Eastern Territories into something vast and terrifying and beautiful all at once. She was 23 years old and completely alone in the world. The thought settled over her like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. 4 months ago, her father had fallen from scaffolding on a construction site in Philadelphia. Patrick Hayes had been a stonemason, a good man with rough hands and a gentle heart, and he had died owing $200 to men who did not believe in mercy. Eleanor could still hear their voices in her father's sick room, cold and businesslike, discussing her future as if she were livestock to be sold at auction. You could work at the saloon on Market Street, the creditor had said, his eyes traveling over her thin frame with an assessment that made her skin crawl. Pretty enough with some paint. Red hair's exotic. You'd make good money. Eleanor had known what kind of work he meant. She had packed her bag that same night. The train cars smelled of unwashed bodies and tobacco smoke and the peculiar desperation of people fleeing something. Across from her, a woman nursed a baby beneath a shawl. 2 seats down, a man with haunted eyes stared out the window at nothing. They were all running, Eleanor thought. All of them seeking redemption or forgetfulness or simply a place where the past could not follow. She pulled the crumpled advertisement from her pocket for perhaps the 100th time. The paper was soft from repeated handling, the words blurred at the edges but still legible. Wanted wife for Montana rancher, must be hardworking. Beauty not required, room board $30 monthly. Right to William Brennan Silver Creek Station, Montana Territory. $30, more than she had ever made scrubbing floors and taking in laundry, more than enough to keep her fed and clothed. She had written immediately her letter brief and honest. She could cook, she could clean, she could work harder than any 2 men if it meant keeping a roof over her head. His reply had arrived 3 weeks later. 3 lines written in a heavy masculine hand. Arrive Silver Creek Station, June 15th. Bring work clothes. Do not expect much. No greeting, no signature. Just those stark words that told her absolutely nothing about the man who would be her husband. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her pocket. Through the window, the sun was sinking behind mountains so enormous they seemed to hold up the sky itself. She had never seen mountains before. Philadelphia had buildings, certainly tall structures of brick and stone, but nothing like these primordial giants that dwarfed everything human and reminded her how small she truly was. The conductor passed through the car, calling out stations. Billings, Livingston, Silver Creek, next stop. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She smoothed down her gray traveling dress, suddenly conscious of how plain she looked. Plain Eleanor. Homely Eleanor. That was what the boys in Philadelphia had called her. Too tall, too thin hair the color of rust, a face full of freckles that no amount of lemon juice could fade. She had been rejected 3 times before placing the advertisement. The first man, a clerk with soft hands, had taken one look at her and announced that he was seeking someone more refined. The second had seemed promising until he learned she had no dowry. The third had simply never shown up for their arranged meeting at all. But William Brennan had not asked what she looked like. He had not asked for money. He wanted a worker, not a decoration. That at least was something Eleanor could provide. The train began to slow. Through the window, she could see a small collection of buildings huddled against the vast emptiness of the prairie. Silver Creek was not so much a town as a stubborn declaration of human presence in a landscape that seemed designed to crush such pretensions. One saloon, its false front weathered gray. A general store, a blacksmith giant with smoke rising from its chimney. Perhaps 20 structures in total connected by a single dirt road. Eleanor gathered her bag and stood on shaking legs. The platform was empty except for one man. He was older, perhaps 55, with silver hair beneath a battered hat and eyes that had seen enough of life to be kind about it. He approached as Eleanor stepped down his gate unhurried. "You would be Miss Hayes," he said. Not a question. Eleanor nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "Frank Wilson." The man extended his hand and she shook it, grateful for the solid warmth of human contact. "I run the general store. Will sent me to fetch you. Where is Mr. Brennan working?" Frank's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Something like concern. "He is always working. Come on, I have the wagon." Eleanor followed him to a buckboard wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. Frank helped her up, then took the reins. They rolled out of Silver Creek, heading west into country that seemed to stretch forever beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. For a long while, neither spoke. Eleanor watched the land unfold, all rolling prairie and distant mountains dotted here and there with cattle. The air smelled different here, clean and sharp, scented with sage and something else she could not name. Freedom, perhaps, or loneliness. They might be the same thing. Miss Hayes, Frank broke the silence carefully. There are things you should know about Will Brennan before we arrive. Eleanor's stomach tightened. He is violent, no. Frank shook his head quickly, not to women, never to women. But his past. He paused, choosing words. Will was not always a rancher. What was he? A gunfighter. Part of the Brennan gang back in the late 70s. They robbed trains, banks. Will killed 7 men that I know of. Maybe more. The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. A killer. She was traveling to marry a killer. Frank must have seen her face go pale because he continued quickly. That was 5 years ago. He left that life. Bought the ranch with his last take, married a sweet girl named Sarah, tried to go straight, but Sarah died in childbirth 4 years back. The baby too. Will has been half dead himself ever since. Eleanor found her voice. Why would such a man want a wife? Frank was quiet for a moment. Because the house is too empty, he said finally. Because a man can only live with ghosts for so long before he starts becoming one himself. And because, he glanced at Eleanor, because Will Brennan is trying very hard to be better than what he was, and I think he believes having someone to care for might help him stay that way. They crested a hill, and Eleanor saw the ranch spread out in the valley below. 200 acres, Frank had said. The house was a solid 2-story structure of logs and boards, weathered, but well-maintained. Beyond it stood a large barn and several corrals. But what caught Eleanor's attention were the horses, dozens of them, 50 at least, maybe more. They moved through the corrals and pastures like water, their coats gleaming copper and black and gray in the slanting sunlight. Eleanor had never seen so many horses in one place. Will raises them, Frank said. Best horses in 3 counties, but he will not sell half of them. Takes in strays, abused animals, anything broken. Spends more on feed than he makes on sales. He glanced at Eleanor. Suppose he has got a soft heart under all that hardness. As they approached the house, a man emerged from the barn. Eleanor's breath caught. William Brennan was enormous, 6 feet 3 inches at least, with shoulders that seemed to span the barn doorway. He wore work clothes, all denim and leather, and his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. Several days' worth of beard shadowed a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. A long scar ran from his hairline down to his right cheekbone, white against tan skin. But it was his eyes that held Eleanor frozen. Green as bottle glass, cold as a January dawn, they settled on her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and utterly dismissed. He moved toward the wagon with long, easy strides. There was something predatory in his grace, something that suggested violence kept carefully leashed. At his hip, Eleanor noticed he wore a Colt .45 revolver, the grip worn smooth from use. "This is Miss Hayes," Frank said cheerfully, as if presenting something ordinary instead of a broach to an outlaw. Will stopped a few feet from the wagon. For a long moment, he simply looked at Eleanor, his expression unreadable. "You are smaller than I expected," he said finally. His voice was deep, a rumble like distant thunder. "Can you manage heavy work?" Eleanor lifted her chin. The fear that had gripped her since Frank's revelation transformed into something else. Anger, perhaps, or simple, stubborn pride. "I work 12-hour days in a Philadelphia laundry, Mr. Brennan. I can manage whatever you require." Something flickered in those cold eyes. Almost amusement. Did not mean offense. Just that ranch work is harder than city work. "I am not afraid of hard work." "Good." He reached up, and before Eleanor could protest, his large hands closed around her waist, and he lifted her down from the wagon as if she weighed nothing at all. His hands were warm through the fabric of her dress. She could feel calluses, the rough texture of a man who worked with his hands. For a moment they stood close enough that Eleanor could smell him. Leather and hay and sweat and something else. Something masculine and indefinable that made her heart race in a way she did not entirely understand. Will set her down quickly and stepped back as if he had touched something hot. "Thank you, Frank," he said, his voice rougher than before. "I will take it from here." Frank nodded, tipped Vice's hat to Eleanor, and drove away, leaving her alone with the man she had traveled 2,000 miles to marry. Will picked up her carpet bag. "The house is clean enough," he said, without looking at her. "Not much for decoration. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right." He paused. "There is a lock on the door. Thought you would want that." The consideration in his words surprised her. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." Will, he corrected. "No need for formality. It is just us out here." Just us. The words sent a strange flutter through Eleanor's chest. He showed her through the house. It was indeed clean if sparse. The furniture was solid and well made, but there was no softness anywhere. No curtains at the windows, no rugs on the floors. Everything spoke of a man who lived alone and saw no point in comfort. "I eat simple," Will explained, standing in the kitchen doorway as though afraid to enter too far. "Biscuits, bacon, beans, whatever is easy. But if you can cook proper, I would appreciate it." "I can cook," Eleanor assured him. Her mother had taught her well before dying when Eleanor was 16. "Good." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Should show you the rest." "Well is out back. There is a root cellar. Chickens need feeding morning and evening, but I can handle that if you would rather not." "I do not mind chickens." "Right." Another pause. "I am in the barn most days. Sunrise to sundown, usually. I will come in for meals, but you will not see much of me otherwise." Eleanor nodded, trying not to feel disappointed. What had she expected? This was an arrangement, nothing more. A business transaction? "I will let you settle in," Will said. "Supper around 6 if that suits you." "That suits me fine." He started to leave, then turned back. "Miss Hayes, Eleanor." His voice was quieter now. "I am glad you are here. The house has been too quiet." Before she could respond, he was gone, his heavy footsteps crossing the porch and fading toward the barn. Eleanor carried her bag upstairs. Her room was small but comfortable, with a window overlooking the corrals. She could see Will already back among the horses, moving with surprising grace for such a large man. He approached a gray mare that shied away from him, and he simply stood still, not forcing, just waiting with infinite patience. Eleanor unpacked her few belongings: 2 dresses, one for work and one for Sunday, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small photograph of her parents taken on their wedding day. She set the photograph on the simple bureau, then changed into her work dress and headed downstairs to investigate the kitchen properly. There was a good supply of staples: flour, salt, sugar, lard. She found a ham hanging in the cold room, potatoes in a bin, dried beans in jars. She could make a decent supper. As she worked, Eleanor found herself humming. It was a habit from childhood, something she had always done while cooking. Her mother used to say that food made with sorghum tasted better. The melody was an old Irish tune, Danny Boy, that her mother had sung on quiet evenings. She was peeling potatoes when she heard it, a soft nicker from outside the kitchen window. Looking up, Eleanor saw a chestnut mare standing just beyond the fence, watching her intently. The mare's ears were pricked forward, her dark eyes fixed on Eleanor's face. Without thinking, Eleanor began to sing, her voice soft and clear, letting the words of Danny Boy fill the kitchen. The mare's ears twitched. By the time Eleanor finished the first verse, 3 more horses had gathered at the fence. "Well, hello," Eleanor whispered, moving to the window. "Aren't you beautiful?" She sang another verse, and the horses seemed to settle, their dark eyes never leaving her face. There was something almost hypnotic about it, this connection she felt with these creatures she had never seen before. They have never done that before. Eleanor spun around to find Will standing in the kitchen doorway, staring at her with an expression she could not name. "I am sorry," she stammered. "I did not mean to disturb them. I was just singing and they came over. I did not mean anything." "No." Will shook his head slowly, taking a step closer. "Do not apologize." That was remarkable. "They never come to the house like that. Most of them are skittish. Been hurt before I got them." He moved to the window, close enough now that Eleanor could feel the heat radiating from his large frame. She caught his scent again, leather and hay, and something uniquely him. "They trust you," Will said quietly, his voice holding a note of wonder. "I have worked with some of these horses for months, and they still shy from me. But you sang and they came running." "I have always liked animals," Eleanor admitted. "My father said I had a gift." Will looked down at her. This close, she could see that his eyes were not simply green. They were reflected with gold, like sunlight through leaves. A scar cut through his left eyebrow. His face was weathered from sun and wind, but there was something almost beautiful in the harsh planes and angles. Would you mind singing to them sometimes? His voice was rough. I think they need it, of course. Eleanor's response came out softer than she intended. I would be happy to. Something passed between them in that moment, something Eleanor did not have words for. An understanding, perhaps. A recognition of shared loneliness. Then Will stepped back, breaking the spell. I will be in the barn if you need anything. Supper at 6, Eleanor reminded him. I will be here. After he left, Eleanor returned to her cooking, but her mind kept drifting to the way Will had looked at her. Not with the dismissive glances she was used to, not with the calculating assessment of the creditor. There had been something else in those green gold eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hope. That evening, Will came in promptly at 6, his hair damp from washing, wearing a clean shirt. Eleanor had set the table with care, using the good plates she found in the cupboard, laying out cloth napkins. The meal she had prepared was the best she could manage with what was available. Roasted ham with a honey-glazed mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans she had found in the cellar, and fresh biscuits. Will stopped in the doorway of the dining room, staring at the table. Something wrong, Eleanor asked suddenly, worried she had overstepped. No, his voice was rough. It has just been a long time since this table was used proper. Since there was someone to cook for. Your wife, the question escaped before Eleanor could stop it. She died 4 years ago, Will said, pulling out a chair and sitting. Childbirth. The baby, too. He said it matter-of-factly, but Eleanor heard the old pain underneath like a wound that had scarred over but never fully healed. I am so sorry. Life out here is hard. Will reached for the food. Sarah was delicate. Too delicate for this life, though she tried. I should not have brought her here. Eleanor sat across from him. You cannot blame yourself for that. Can I? He looked at her then, really looked at her. She was so young, so full of dreams, and I killed her with those dreams. She loved you, Eleanor said softly. I am sure of that. And love makes us brave enough to take risks. Will's jaw worked, and for a moment she thought he might cry. But he just nodded and reached for his fork. They ate in silence for a few minutes, but it was not uncomfortable. Eleanor found herself stealing glances at him, noting the way his large hands handled the utensils with surprising delicacy, the way his face softened as he tasted her cooking. This is wonderful, he finally said. Best meal I have had in years. Thank you. No, I mean it. He met her eyes. You are talented, Eleanor. You could probably get work in a fine house in San Francisco or Denver. Why come all the way out here to cook for a horse rancher? Eleanor considered lying, but something about his honesty deserved the same in return. Because fine houses want references I do not have. They want someone younger and prettier. They want. She trailed off. What Will prompted gently. They want someone who has not been rejected so many times she has lost count. The words came out bitter. I am too plain, too old, too poor, too everything. Your advertisement was the only offer I received in 3 months of looking. Then they were fools. Eleanor looked up, startled. You are not plain, Will continued, his voice firm. You have got kind eyes and a smile that makes my horses come running. You have got skill and courage enough to travel across the country alone. Any man who cannot see that is not worth your time. Heat flooded Eleanor's face. Thank you. Just truth. He returned to his meal as if he had not just said the kindest words anyone had spoken to her in years. After supper, Eleanor insisted on cleaning up alone. Will hovered for a moment, clearly uncertain, then retreated to the porch with a cup of coffee. When Eleanor finished, she found him sitting on the porch stage, staring out at the darkening valley. The horses had settled for the night, but she could still hear their soft sounds carrying on the evening breeze. The sky above was turning purple and gold, streaked with clouds that caught the last light like embers. May I join you, she asked. Will shifted over, immediately making room. Eleanor sat carefully, maintaining a proper distance, though something in her wanted to sit closer. It is beautiful here, she said. It is. Will's voice was quiet. But it is lonely too. I forget that sometimes until there is someone else to remind me what company feels like. How long have you been alone? 4 years since Sarah died, but I was alone before that too, in different ways. He glanced at her. Marriage is not always companionship. No, Eleanor agreed, thinking of her parents' quiet, dutiful relationship. I suppose it is not. Did you ever come close to marrying? Eleanor laughed, but it held no humor. No, I was not the kind of girl men looked at twice. My father needed care, and by the time he died, I was well past the age when men seek wives. 23 is not old. It is in Philadelphia, especially when you are plain and poor. You keep saying that word. Will turned to face her fully. Plain. But you are not. You have got pretty hair like copper in sunlight. Your eyes are the color of the sky before a storm. And when you smile, really smile. He shook his head. Any man who called you plain was blind. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. Will I? I am sorry. He stood abruptly. That was inappropriate. You work for me. I should not have said those things. I did not mind, Eleanor said quickly, standing as well. I am not used to hearing such things. They stood facing each other in the gathering dark, and Eleanor could feel the tension thrumming between them like a living thing. She became aware of how large he was, how he could probably break her in half without effort, and yet something in his eyes told her he would sooner break himself than harm her. I should go check the horses. Will said, his voice rough. Good night, Eleanor. Good night. She watched him walk toward the barn, his figure disappearing into shadow, and pressed a hand to her racing heart. What was happening to her? The days fell into a rhythm. Eleanor rose early, made breakfast, spent her mornings cleaning and preparing meals. Afternoons, she found herself drawn to the kitchen window, watching Will work with the horses. He was mesmerizing to watch. Despite his size, he moved with patience and gentleness around even the most skittish animals. She watched him spend an hour just sitting in a corral with a scarred gelding, not moving, barely breathing until the horse finally approached him. And every day Eleanor sang while she worked. The horses learned to gather near the house during her morning songs. She saw Will smile more than once when he noticed them. 2 weeks into her employment, Eleanor was hanging laundry when she heard a commotion from the barn. Dropping the sheet she held, she hurried over to find Will kneeling beside a black mare, his hands gentle on her swollen belly. Is she all right? Eleanor asked from the doorway. She is in labor. Will looked up and she saw worry in his eyes. It is too early. The foal might not make it. What can I do? Nothing. There is nothing to do but wait. But his voice shook slightly. Eleanor moved closer, kneeling in the straw beside him. The mare Midnight was breathing hard, her eyes rolling with fear. May I? Eleanor reached out slowly, and when Will nodded, she placed her hand on the mare's neck and began to sing. Soft and low, the lullaby her mother had sung during storms. All through the night, the mare's breathing slowed. Her eyes found Eleanor's face and held. Keep singing, Will whispered. It is helping. Eleanor sang through the next hour as the mare labored. Will's hands worked with practiced skill, and once, when things got difficult, his hand found Eleanor's knee and squeezed. She squeezed back, still singing, and felt him relax slightly. Finally, with a rush, the foal was born, tiny and wet and perfect. It is a colt, Will said, his voice thick with emotion. He helped the mare, then sat back on his heels, watching as she began to clean her baby. He is going to make it. They both are. Eleanor realized she was crying. That was beautiful. Will turned to her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Thank you for being here, for singing. I do not think she would have stayed calm without you. I did not do anything. You did everything. His hand came up, fingers hovering near her face as if he wanted to touch her, but did not dare. Eleanor, why? The mare nickered, drawing their attention back. The moment passed, but Eleanor felt its echo in her racing heart. They stayed with the mare and foal until both were resting comfortably, then walked back to the house together in the late afternoon sun. I should start supper, Eleanor said, though she did not want this closeness to end. And I should clean up. Will paused on the porch. But Eleanor, thank you. Not just for today, but for all of it. Having you here, it has made everything better. Before she could respond, he disappeared into the house. Eleanor stood on the porch, touching her chest where her heart beat wildly, and admitted to herself what she had been denying for weeks. She was falling in love with William Brennan. The realization terrified her. This was supposed to be a job, a new start, not a path to heartbreak. Men like Will did not fall for women like her. Did they? But that night at supper, when their eyes met across the table, Eleanor saw something that gave her hope. Something warm and wondering in his gaze that mirrored what she felt. After the meal, Will did not retreat to the barn. Instead, he helped her with the dishes, their arms brushing in the small kitchen, sending sparks through Eleanor every time they touched. The new colt needs a name, Will said as he dried a plate. You should name him. He is yours. What about hope, Eleanor suggested? Because that is what I felt when he was born. Hope that things could be different, better. Hope, Will looked at her. That is a beautiful name. For a beautiful gift, they finished the dishes in comfortable silence, then found themselves back on the porch sitting closer than they had before. Eleanor, Will's voice was uncertain. I need to tell you something and I do not want you to feel obligated in any way. You can say no and nothing will change between us. You will still have a job here as long as you want it. Her mouth went dry. All right, these past few weeks having you here, it has reminded me what it feels like to not be alone, to have someone to talk to share meals with, to... He stopped, taking a breath. You make me remember that I am not just a rancher, that I am a man, and I know I am not what women want. I am too big, too rough, too much of everything. But I cannot help how I feel. How do you feel, Eleanor whispered. Like I have been waiting my whole life for you to walk through my door. His hand found hers, engulfing it. Like my horses have been waiting too. Like everything was just marking time until you arrived. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Will, I know I should not say these things. You are young and you could do so much better. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this way. I just needed you to know. You think I could do better? Eleanor turned to face him fully. Will do. You know what I see when I look at you, he shook his head. I see a man who takes in broken horses because he cannot stand to see anything suffer. A man who builds locks on doors so his housekeeper feels safe. A man who sits in the dirt for hours waiting for a scared animal to trust him. Her voice broke. I see the most beautiful person I have ever known. Will stared at her, and in the moonlight she saw hope and disbelief warring in his expression. You mean that every word? Eleanor squeezed his hand. I came here expecting a job. I did not expect to find this. What is this? He asked softly. I do not know. Eleanor's heart pounded. But I want to find out. Will raised their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles with a gentleness that made her shiver. I will be patient. I will court you proper. I will not rush. Well, Eleanor interrupted. I do not need rushing, but I do not need excessive patience either. I am not made of glass. Something dark and hot flashed in his eyes. Eleanor, if you knew the things I think about when I see you in my kitchen, wearing my mother's apron, singing to my horses. He shook his head. You deserve better than a man who wants to kiss you until you cannot remember your own name. Heat flooded Eleanor's body. What if that is what I want too? You do not know what you are saying, don't I? She shifted closer, emboldened by desire she had never felt before. I am 23 years old, Will. I know my own mind. And my mind is telling me that I want you to kiss me. Eleanor, her name was almost a groan. Please. That single word broke something in him. His hand came up to cup her face, his palm rough against her cheek, his thumb tracing her lower lip with devastating tenderness. I have wanted to do this since the day you arrived, he whispered. Since you stood in my yard with your chin up, telling me your size did not matter. Then stop talking and do it. Will leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Eleanor did not move, did not breathe until his lips touched hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent. But when Eleanor sighed against his mouth, Will deepened it, his other hand coming up to frame her face, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. Eleanor had been kissed before. Brief pecks from boys who had lost interest quickly. But this was different. This was Will pouring 4 years of loneliness and longing into touching her and Eleanor, answering with every lonely night she had spent, believing no one would ever want her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Will rested his forehead against hers. I should apologize, he murmured, but I cannot. I am not sorry. Good, Eleanor said, because I would have to be angry with you if you were. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. You are remarkable. You know that. You make me feel remarkable. Eleanor pulled back to look at him. You make me feel like I matter. You do matter. Will's expression was fierce. You matter more than you could possibly know. They sat together on the porch for hours, talking and occasionally kissing until the moon was high and Eleanor was yawning despite herself. You should sleep, Will said reluctantly. You will be exhausted tomorrow. So will you. I am used to it. He stood, then helped her up, his hands lingering on hers. Eleanor, about what happens now. We do not have to decide everything tonight, Eleanor said. We can take this one day at a time, as long as there are more days like this one. Will brought her hand to his lips again. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Will. Eleanor went to her room in a daze, touching her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. She had come to Montana expecting nothing, and now she had everything. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find a bouquet of wildflowers on her doorstep, purple lupine and Indian paintbrush still wet with dew. No note, but she knew who had left them. She pressed one of the flowers between the pages of her mother's old Bible, a memory she wanted to keep forever. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Eleanor's life. Will courted her with a sweetness that made her heart ache. He brought her flowers from the meadow beyond the north pasture. He carved her a new wooden spoon when he noticed hers was wearing thin. And every evening without fail, they sat together on the porch and talked about everything and nothing. And he kissed her. Lord, how he kissed her. Slowly and thoroughly, as if he had all the time in the world and wanted to spend it learning the taste of her mouth. His hands remained respectful, never straying below her waist, but the heat in his eyes promised more. Soon those eyes said, when the time is right. Eleanor sang every day now, not just while cooking, but deliberately standing at the window where the horses could gather. Shadow the gray mare with the terrible scars began to approach the fence. Thunder the black gelding with the crooked gait from his broken leg would press his nose against the glass. Even Dusty, the old warhorse who trusted no one, started to linger near the house. Will watched with wonder in his eyes. You have given them something I never could, he told her one evening. Peace. 3 weeks after their first kiss, Eleanor was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the thunder of hooves. Looking up, she saw 4 riders approaching fast, their horses kicking up clouds of dust against the afternoon sky. Something about the way they rode hard and purposeful made her stomach clench with fear. She dropped her trowel and hurried toward the house, but before she could reach the door, the riders had arrived. They spread out in a semicircle facing the barn where Will was working. Eleanor pressed herself against the side of the house, watching through the corner of her eye. The leader was a man of perhaps 40, lean as a whip, with a scar that ran vertically down his face from forehead to chin. His eyes were an unsettling shade of yellow-brown, like old whiskey. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. Will Brennan, the man's voice carried across the yard, loud and mocking. Long-time old friend. Will emerged from the barn, slowly wiping his hands on a rag. His face had gone completely still, empty of all expression. Eleanor had never seen him look like that before. He looked dangerous. Cutter Will said, his voice flat, I am not your friend. Have not been for 5 years. The man called Cutter laughed. Now, no need to be unfriendly. We rode together once, robbed the Cheyenne Bank, remember? You, me, and poor dead Tommy Bradford. Good times, that life is over. So I heard. Cutter's gaze drifted toward the house, and Eleanor shrank back, praying he had not seen her. Heard you turned respectable. Raising horses now, and I see you got yourself a woman. His smile was like a knife blade. Pretty thing. Red hair. Bet she is worth something. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. What do you want? Cutter Will's hand had moved to hover near his Colt revolver. His fingers were steady, but Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders. Just being neighborly, Cutter said. Thought I would stop by, see how my old partner was doing. Maybe discuss a business proposition. I am not interested in any business with you. Now do not be hasty. Cutter leaned forward in his saddle. I need 10 of your best horses. Good, strong animals. And, his smile widened, I thought maybe you could lend me that wife of yours for a few days. The saloon in Cheyenne is short on entertainment, and a woman like that, well, she would make good money. The words were still hanging in the air when Will moved. He was faster than Eleanor would have thought possible for a man his size. He grabbed Cutter by his shirt and hauled him off his horse, with one hand slamming him against the barn wall hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. If you ever speak about her that way again, Will said, his voice deadly quiet, I will break every bone in your worthless body. Do you understand me? The other 3 men reached for their guns, but Will already had his Colt out, pressed under Cutter's chin. His green eyes were ice-cold, empty of everything human. Go ahead, he said to the others. Draw. But your friend dies first. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Eleanor held her breath, certain she was about to witness murder. Her hand found the small derringer Will had given her, tucked in her apron pocket. If shooting started, she would not go down without a fight. Then Cutter laughed a nervous sound that did not quite hide his fear. Easy, Brennan. Just making conversation. No need to get violent. Will held him for another long moment, then shoved him away hard. Cutter stumbled but caught himself. His hand went to his throat where the gun barrel had pressed. I am giving you 10 seconds to get off my land, Will said. If you are still here when I finish counting, I will show you just how violent I can get. You will regret this, Cutter said, backing toward his horse. You think you can just walk away from what you were. You are a killer, Brennan. Always will be, one Will said. Cutter swung up into his saddle. 2, 3, 4. The four men wheeled their horses and rode off fast, Cutter looking back once with eyes full of hatred. Will stood motionless until they were gone, his gun still in his hand. Then slowly his shoulders began to shake. The gun fell from his fingers into the dirt. Eleanor ran to him. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her face against his broad back. She could feel his heart hammering like a trapped bird. Will, she whispered, you are safe. I am safe. They are gone. I almost killed him. Will's voice was raw. I had the gun to his throat and I wanted to pull the trigger. Wanted it so bad I could taste it. But you did not. Because of you. He turned in her arms, his face stricken. If you had not been here, if I did not have something good to lose, I would have killed all four of them and not lost a moment's sleep over it. Eleanor took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. You chose mercy. You chose to be better than what they wanted you to be. That is what matters. Will pulled her against his chest, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. I love you, he said into her hair. I know it is too soon. I know I should not say it. But I love you, Eleanor. You have changed everything. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. So much it scares me. He pulled back to look at her, wonder in his eyes. Say it again. I love you, Will Brennan. I love your gentleness and your strength. I love the way you care for broken things. I love. He kissed her, cutting off her words. And this kiss was different from all the others. It was claiming and desperate and full of promise. When they broke apart, Will was trembling. Marry me, he said. Eleanor's breath caught. What I know it is fast. I know you deserve a proper courtship. But I cannot wait anymore. His hands framed her face. Marry me, Eleanor. Make this house a home. Make me a whole man again. Yes. The word came without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. Will's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. And when he set her down, he kissed her again. When he asked against her lips, as soon as possible, Eleanor said, tomorrow we can ride into town tomorrow and find a preacher. Tomorrow, Will laughed. God, yes. Tomorrow. They spent the rest of the day in a happy daze making plans and stealing kisses. That night, they sat on the porch as usual, but this time Will pulled Eleanor onto his lap, holding her close. I never thought I would have this again, he admitted. After Sarah died, I thought I was done with happiness, done with love. But then you stepped off that stagecoach, and everything changed. I was so scared that day, Eleanor confessed. I thought I was going to work for some crusty old rancher who would barely notice I existed. Instead, you got me. Will's smile was self-deprecating. Instead, I got everything I did not know I needed. Eleanor touched his face. You, this place, those beautiful horses, a life I never dreamed possible. Our life will corrected. From tomorrow on, it is our life. Our life, Eleanor repeated, loving the sound of it. The next day dawned clear and bright. They rode into Silver Creek together, Will on his big bay gelding and Eleanor on Gentle Daisy. At the small church, they found Pastor Thomas, a kindly man of 60 with gentle eyes and silver hair. We would like to be married, Will said simply. Pastor Thomas smiled. I thought this day might come. I have seen the way you look at each other when you come to town for supplies. He glanced at Eleanor. You are certain my dear Will's past is well known around here. I know his past, Eleanor said firmly. I am marrying his future. The ceremony was simple. Frank Wilson and his wife Mary served as witnesses. Eleanor wore her best dress, plain blue cotton, and Will had clearly made an effort, his hair neatly combed, his shirt pressed. When Pastor Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Will's kiss was tender and full of promise. The ride back to the ranch felt different. This was their home now. Truly. Eleanor was Mrs. Brennan, and the knowledge filled her with joy. That evening, as Eleanor prepared supper, Will came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "My wife," he murmured against her neck. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Eleanor said, leaning back against him. "Eleanor," Will's voice grew serious. "About tonight, I want you to know we do not have to rush anything if you are not ready." Eleanor turned in his arms, placing a finger on his lips. "Well, I have been ready since the day you first kissed me. I want this. I want you." The heat in his eyes made her shiver. "I will be gentle," he promised. "I swear it." "I know you will," Eleanor said. "I trust you completely." Supper was a hurried affair, both of them too aware of what would come after. When the dishes were done, Will took Eleanor's hand and led her upstairs. Their wedding night was everything Eleanor had hoped for and more. Will was indeed gentle, but also passionate, showing her pleasures she had never imagined. And when she cried out his name, he held her close and whispered words of love against her skin. Afterward, lying in his arms, Eleanor felt complete for the first time in her life. "Are you all right?" Will asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I am perfect." Eleanor smiled up at him. "Absolutely perfect. I do not deserve you," Will said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I am going to spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Eleanor said, kissing his chest right over his heart. "You have always been worthy, Will. You just could not see it." The months that followed were both blissful and challenging. Eleanor threw herself into making the house a proper home, adding curtains and rugs and small touches of beauty. She planted flowers in the neglected beds beside the porch herbs in the kitchen garden. Will watched her transform his house with wonder in his eyes. "You are making it beautiful," he told her one evening. "It was always beautiful," Eleanor corrected. "I am just helping it show." The horses thrived under her daily songs. Even Shadow, the most damaged of them all, began to trust Eleanor. One afternoon, after weeks of patient singing, the gray mare finally approached and pressed her nose into Eleanor's hand. Will had tears in his eyes when he saw it. "I have been trying to reach her for 6 months," he said, his voice thick. "And you did it in weeks." "She just needed to know she was safe," Eleanor said softly. "We all do." But 3 months after their wedding, as October brought the first hint of winter trouble arrived, 18 of their horses fell sick with strangles, a bacterial infection that caused high fever, difficulty breathing, and swelling of the lymph nodes. The veterinary medicine they needed cost $150, nearly all their savings. Will stood in the barn watching Thunder struggle to breathe, his face carved from stone. "We might lose them all," he said quietly. The next day, Richard Sterling arrived. He was a wealthy rancher from 2 counties over, a man in his 50s with silver hair and expensive clothes. He looked around the property with calculating eyes. "Brennan," he said, "I will buy your ranch. $5,000. You and your wife can live comfortably in Denver. Start fresh." Will's jaw tightened. "This is our home. It is not for sale. Your horses are dying. You are going to lose everything anyway. Think about your wife. Would she not be happier in the city?" "My wife is happy here," Will said firmly. "The answer is no." Sterling shook his head. "Stubborn fool. When you change your mind, the offer stands." After he left, Eleanor found Will in Shadow's stall, running his hands over the mare's fevered coat. "We are not selling, are we?" she asked. "No," Will said, "but I do not know how we will save them." Eleanor had been thinking about this. She had spent the previous night reading Will's veterinary books by lamplight, searching for alternatives to the expensive medicine. And she had found something. A combination of wild echinacea which grew in the meadows, and careful nursing might work. But there was something else she needed to tell Will. Something she had discovered 2 weeks ago and had been too afraid to share during the crisis. "Will," she said softly, "I am pregnant." He froze, his hand still on Shadow's neck. "What, I am about 2 months along." Eleanor watched his face carefully, looking for signs of panic or fear. "I know the timing is terrible with the horses sick, but—" Will crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "Terrible, Eleanor. This is the best news." "The best." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "We are going to have a baby. You are not scared," to repeat, he admitted, "but also happier than I have been in my entire life." He placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We will get through this. The horse is everything. We will make it work." Eleanor told him her plan. They would gather echinacea from the meadows, brew it into a strong tea, and dose each sick horse 3 times a day. Combined with Eleanor singing to keep them calm and comfortable, it might work. For 3 weeks, they barely slept. Eleanor spent 18 to 20 hours a day in the barn, moving from stall to stall, singing to each horse, administering medicine, changing bedding, offering water and comfort. Will worked beside her, his hands gentle even in his exhaustion. "You need to rest," he begged her. "Think of the baby. The horses need me," Eleanor insisted, "just like you needed them years ago. I will not abandon them." In the end, they saved 15 of the 18 horses. Thunder the black gelding died in Eleanor's arms on the second week, his breath rattling one last time before going still. Bella, a sweet-natured bay mare, followed 2 days later. Duke, an old white gelding, was the last to go. Will buried them on the hill overlooking the ranch, carving their names into wooden markers. He stood over the graves for a long time, his shoulders shaking with silent tears. When Richard Sterling returned with his offer, Will's refusal was absolute. "This land is my children's heritage. It will never be for sale." After Sterling left, looking frustrated, Eleanor hugged Will tight. "Thank you for choosing us over wealth," Eleanor, Will said, cupping her face in his hands. "You are my wealth, you and this baby. Everything else is just details." Winter came hard and early that year. They were snowed in for days at a time, but Eleanor did not mind. She and Will spent long evenings by the fire talking and planning for the baby. Will carved a beautiful wooden cradle, decorating the headboard with horses. "It is perfect," Eleanor breathed when he showed her the finished piece. "For our perfect child," Will replied, kissing her forehead. As her belly grew round with their child, Eleanor continued to sing to the horses. They seemed fascinated by the change in her, often pressing their noses gently against her swollen stomach, as if greeting the baby within. "They know," Will said one afternoon, watching Shadow nuzzle Eleanor's belly. "Animals always know." Eleanor was 6 months pregnant when the morning sickness finally faded and her appetite returned with a vengeance. Will took to cooking breakfast himself so she could sleep an extra hour. He was attentive to the point of being overprotective, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a spoon. "I am not fragile," she reminded him one afternoon when he carried her from the garden to the house despite her protests. "I am growing a human being. That makes me stronger, not weaker." "I know," Will said, setting her down carefully, "but you are carrying my child. Our child. I cannot help wanting to keep you safe." Eleanor softened, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "Feel that. That is our baby, telling you I am strong enough for this." The baby kicked hard against his palm, and Will's face transformed with wonder. "That is our child. Our child." As spring arrived and Eleanor entered her final months of pregnancy, Will became increasingly anxious. The memory of Sarah's death haunted him. Eleanor would wake in the night to find him watching her sleep, his hand protective on her belly. "I will not lose you," he whispered once, thinking she was asleep. "I cannot lose you. You will not." Eleanor whispered back, taking his hand. "I am healthy. The baby is healthy, doctor. Henderson says everything is perfect. You have to trust that." "I am trying," Will said. "God, I am trying." On a hot afternoon in mid-June, exactly 1 year after Eleanor had first arrived in Silver Creek, her labor began. She had been hanging sheets when the first pain hit strong enough to make her gasp. Will, she called, and he came running from the barn. "Is it time?" His voice was strained, his face pale. "I think so," Eleanor said. Another pain gripped her, and she breathed through it. "You should fetch Dr. Henderson." "I am not leaving you." "Will we need the doctor?" "I will send Frank's son." He was already moving, helping her into the house. "I am staying right here." And he did. Through the long hours of labor, Will never left Eleanor's side. He held her hand, wiped her brow, whispered encouragement, even as his own face grew pale with worry. When the pains grew intense, she gripped his hand so hard she knew she must be hurting him, but he never flinched. "You are doing so well," he murmured, pressing kisses to her damp forehead. "So strong, my love. So brave." Dr. Henderson arrived and examined Eleanor, his expression reassuring. "Everything is progressing nicely, Mrs. Brennan. It will not be too much longer now." But as the hours stretched on and the sun began to set, Eleanor's strength started to wane. The pains were overwhelming, and she began to cry. "I cannot do this," she sobbed. "It is too much. Yes, you can." Will's voice was firm, his eyes fierce with faith in her. You are the strongest person I know. You can do anything. Stay with me, Eleanor begged. Please stay with me, always, Will said, kissing her hand. I will always stay with you. And when their daughter was born, as the last light of day faded perfect and healthy, with her mother's red hair and her father's green eyes, Will wept openly. She is beautiful, he whispered, holding the tiny bundle with infinite care, just like her mother. Eleanor, exhausted but happy, watched her husband cradling their daughter. What should we name her? Will looked down at his daughter, then at Eleanor. Grace, because that is what you both are. Grace I never deserved but received anyway. Grace Eleanor tested the name. Grace Eleanor Brennan, it is perfect. Dr. Henderson smiled. A healthy baby girl and a healthy mother. Congratulations to you both. After the doctor left and Eleanor was cleaned up and resting comfortably, Will sat beside the bed, still holding Grace with a reverence that made Eleanor's eyes well up with tears. Thank you, he said softly, for her, for surviving, for being strong enough to give me this gift. We made her together, Eleanor reminded him. She is ours. That night, Will barely slept. He sat in the rocking chair beside the bed, Grace in his arms, watching over both his girls as if he could protect them from the entire world through Will alone. The months after Grace's birth were challenging but wonderful. Will proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Eleanor for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his daughter and marveling at her. Eleanor would often wake to find him standing by the window, Grace in his arms, talking to her about the horses and the ranch and all the things he would teach her. She cannot understand you yet, Eleanor said one morning, amused. She will someday, Will replied, and I want her to know her father's voice, want her to know she is loved from the very first moment. When Grace was 3 months old, Eleanor returned to singing to the horses, the baby strapped to her chest in a sling Will had fashioned from soft leather. The horses were gentle around the infant, as if they understood she was precious. One afternoon, Eleanor found Will in the barn showing 6-month-old Grace the spring foals. And this one is Hope, Will was saying, his voice soft. He was born the night your mama sang to his mother. We thought we might lose them both, but your mama's voice saved them. Eleanor's heart swelled watching this beautiful, gentle giant of a man holding their daughter so carefully. There you are, Will said, spotting her. We were just having a conversation about horses. Were we not, Grace? The baby gurgled happily, and Eleanor laughed. She is going to be a horse girl, Eleanor said. Just like her father. Nothing wrong with that, Will said, standing with Grace cradled against his chest. Come here. Eleanor moved into his embrace, the three of them standing together in the golden afternoon light streaming through the barn windows. Do you remember what Frank said that first day? Will asked quietly. About my horses, waiting their whole lives for you, I remember. I think I was waiting too. I just did not know it until you arrived. He kissed the top of her head. Thank you for coming to Montana, Eleanor. Thank you for giving me a second chance at happiness. Thank you for seeing me, Eleanor replied, her voice thick with emotion. For making me believe I was worth loving. You were always worth loving, Will said, tipping her chin up to look at him. Always. As they stood together, their daughter between them, the horses gathered at the barn door, drawn by the sound of their voices. Eleanor began to sing, and Will joined in, his deep voice harmonizing with hers. Grace laughed, reaching her tiny hands toward the horses. Eleanor thought about how far she had come, from lonely, rejected spinster to beloved wife and mother, from invisible to cherished. And she knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. The seasons turned like pages in a book Eleanor had not known she was writing. Grace grew from a gurgling infant into a curious toddler with her mother's copper hair and her father's stubborn determination. By the time she was 2 years old, she could often be found in the corrals singing to the horses in her sweet off-key voice, fearlessly approaching animals that still shied from strangers. She has your gift, Will said one afternoon, watching Grace pat Shadow's nose while the gray mare stood perfectly still. And your heart. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand finding his. She has your gentleness too, your patience. Will pulled her close, kissing her temple. We made something good together. But as autumn painted the Montana hills in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor began to notice something troubling. Shadow, the gray mare, who had been one of the first to trust her, was moving more slowly. Her coat had lost its sheen, and her eyes, once bright with recovered trust, had grown dim. She is old, Will said quietly one evening as they watched the mare from the porch. I found her half-starved 7 years ago. She was already past her prime then. How long does she have? Will's jaw tightened. Not long, maybe through the winter if we are lucky. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She had grown to love Shadow deeply. The mare represented something important, proof that even the most damaged hearts could learn to trust again. As winter settled over the ranch, Eleanor spent extra time with Shadow, singing to her daily, bringing her special treats of molasses-sweetened grain. Grace, now understanding that the horse was sick, would sit quietly beside Eleanor in the stall, her small hand resting on Shadow's neck. Will you get better, Shadow? Grace asked one day, her voice so full of hope it broke Eleanor's heart. Sometimes, Grace, Eleanor said carefully, even when we love someone very much, we cannot make them stay forever. Why not? Because that is not how life works, sweetheart. But the love we give them, that lasts, that never dies. On a cold January afternoon, Shadow lay down in her stall and could not get up again. Will carried Grace into the house while Eleanor settled in the straw beside the mare, cradling Shadow's head in her lap. Will returned alone and sat beside Eleanor, his large hand stroking Shadow's neck. She has had a good life these past years, he said quietly. Because of you, because of us, Eleanor corrected. You saved her first. They sat with Shadow as the light faded from the windows, Eleanor singing softly, Will's hand never leaving the mare's neck. Just as the sun touched the horizon, Shadow drew one last shuddering breath and went still. Eleanor wept into Will's shoulder while he held her, his own tears falling silently into her hair. The next day, they buried Shadow on the hill overlooking the ranch, the same hill where Thunder and Bella and Duke rested. Will carved Shadow's name into a wooden marker, while Grace picked wildflowers to lay on the grave. What did Shadow teach us? Mama Grace asked as they stood over the fresh earth. Eleanor knelt beside her daughter. She taught us that wounds can heal, that trust can be rebuilt, that love is always worth the risk of loss. Will lifted Grace into his arms, and the three of them stood on the hill in the winter wind, saying goodbye to a friend. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought renewal. The meadows exploded with wildflowers and the horses grew sleek and healthy. Eleanor, now 25, found herself pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, only joy. Another one. Will set his hand on her belly, his smile wide. We are going to have another baby. Grace danced around them. A brother. I want a brother to help Papa with the horses. We will love whatever God gives us, Eleanor said, but she secretly hoped for a boy too. Will deserved a son. Her pregnancy progressed smoothly. By summer, her belly was round and full, and Grace delighted in feeling the baby kick. Will was still protective, but less panicked than before. He trusted Eleanor's strength, now trusted that she would survive. Their son was born on a crisp October morning. His arrival quick and relatively easy compared to Grace's lengthy labor. He came into the world with a loud cry and a full head of dark hair. He has got lungs like a mountain lion. Dr. Henderson laughed, and his mother's determination, Will added, cradling the baby with the same wonder he had shown with Grace. They named him Thomas after Frank Wilson, the kind man who had brought Eleanor to the ranch and had become like family to them. When they told Frank, the older man wept openly. I am honored beyond words, he said, holding little Thomas carefully. He will need a strong name to live up to. Grace adored her baby brother from the first moment, insisting on helping with everything. She sang to him just as Eleanor sang to the horses, and young Thomas would quiet immediately at the sound of his sister's voice. The ranch prospered in ways they had not expected. Word spread about Will's way with horses and Eleanor's healing songs. People came from 3 counties away to buy Brennan horses, willing to pay premium prices for animals that were not just well-trained, but emotionally sound. Will's reputation grew. Wealthy ranchers began sending him their most difficult cases, horses so damaged by abuse or trauma that they were considered unsalvageable. Will would take them and work with them for months and return them transformed. He never charged what he could have. His prices remained fair, almost modest. You could be rich, Eleanor told him one evening after he had turned down a substantial offer from a cattle baron. I am rich, Will said, pulling her close. I have you. I have our children. I have work that matters. What more could a man want? But prosperity brought its own challenges. That spring, Richard Sterling returned with an even larger offer, $10,000 for the ranch. Enough money to live like kings anywhere they chose. You could move to San Francisco, Sterling urged. Your children could have the best schools. Your wife could have servants, fine dresses. Think about what you are denying them. Will did not even hesitate. This land is my children's heritage. They will learn the value of work, of caring for living things, of keeping promises. No amount of money is worth giving that up. After Sterling left, clearly frustrated, Eleanor hugged Will tightly. Thank you for choosing us over wealth. Eleanor Will cupped her face in his hands. You are my wealth, you and Grace and Thomas. Everything else is just details. As the children grew, Eleanor began to think about the future. Grace was 4 now, bright and curious, asking questions about everything. Thomas, at 18 months, was already trying to walk and getting into everything he could reach. I want to start a school, Eleanor told Will one evening as they sat on the porch. There are children scattered all over this valley, and the nearest school is 15 miles away. We could use the old barn, fix it up. Will's face lit up. That is a wonderful idea. We could start in the fall. I will help you prepare the space. They spent the summer transforming the old barn into a classroom. Will built desks and shelves while Eleanor gathered books and supplies. When they opened the Silver Creek Valley School that September 12, children arrived on the first day ranging in age from 5 to 14. Eleanor discovered she loved teaching. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic, but also music and natural history. Will came in twice a week to teach the children about horses and animal husbandry, his gentle way with the students as remarkable as his way with the animals. Grace was Eleanor's star pupil, already reading at a level far beyond her years. Thomas, though too young for formal lessons, would sit in the corner with his slate copying letters and numbers with determined concentration. The school became the heart of the community. Parents would linger after picking up their children, sharing news and offering help with various projects. The ranch, once isolated and lonely, became a gathering place. But Eleanor's contentment was shattered one afternoon in late spring when 4 riders appeared on the horizon. Even from a distance, she recognized the way they sat their horses. Hard men, dangerous men. Will, she called, her voice tight with fear. He emerged from the barn, took one look at the riders, and his face went hard. Get the children inside. Now, Eleanor herded Grace and Thomas into the house, then grabbed the derringer Will had given her years ago. Through the window, she watched the riders approach. The leader was Jake Cutter. 5 years had aged him badly. His face was more lined, his eyes harder, but the scar down his face was unmistakable. He rode alone this time, no gang with him, but something about his solitary presence was more menacing than if he had brought an army. Will stood in the yard, his hand near his colt. Cutter, he said flatly, I thought I made myself clear last time. Cutter dismounted slowly, his movements careful. Easy, Brennan. I'm not here to cause trouble. See no gun. It was true. Cutter's holster was conspicuously empty. Then why are you here? Will's voice was ice. Cutter looked around the ranch, taking in the well-maintained buildings, the healthy horses, the signs of prosperity and happiness. To see what you made of yourself, he said, and to tell you something. Will waited, his body coiled tight as a spring. You were right, Cutter said, and the admission seemed to cost him. 5 years ago, when you chose this life over the old one, you were right and I was wrong. Will's expression did not change. Keep talking. I have spent the last 5 years the same way I spent the 10 before that, Cutter continued. Robbing, fighting, running, and you know what I got to show for it? Nothing. No home, no family, no one who gives a damn if I live or die. He looked at Will with something like envy. You found redemption, Brennan. You found a way to be better than what we were. So what do you want from me? Will asked. Forgiveness, no, Cutter said. I do not deserve that, and I know it. I just wanted you to know that I am done. Done with the violence, done with the running. I am going to find work somewhere, honest work, and try to die as something other than what I have been. Inside the house, Eleanor held her breath. Through the window, she could see the tension in Will's shoulders, the way his hand hovered near his gun. For a long moment, he simply stared at Cutter. Then slowly, Will's hand moved away from his weapon. It is never too late, he said, to choose different, to be better. If a killer like me can find peace, anyone can. Cutter nodded, then turned back to his horse. For what it is worth, Brennan, I am glad one of us made it out. Tell your wife, he paused. Tell her I am sorry for what I said. She deserves better than the world I come from. He rode away without looking back, disappearing into the afternoon shadows. Will stood motionless for a long time before Eleanor came out of the house. The children, sensing something important had happened, stayed inside with Grace, keeping watch over Thomas. "Do you think he meant it?" Eleanor asked, slipping her hand into Will's. "I do not know," Will admitted, "but I had to give him the chance, because someone once gave me that chance." He turned to her, his eyes haunted. "That could have been me, Eleanor, if you had not come, if I had not found something worth living for, worth changing for. I would have ended up just like him, alone and empty and full of regret." "But you did not," Eleanor said firmly. "You chose differently. You chose us. You chose to be the man you wanted to be, not the man you were forced to become." Will pulled her against his chest. "I choose you," he said into her hair. "Every day, every moment, I choose this life." That autumn brought another loss. Frank Wilson, now 60 years old, suffered a stroke. He lingered for a week, his wife Mary at his side, before passing peacefully in his sleep. The funeral brought the entire valley together. Frank had been a friend to everyone, had helped more people than could be counted. Will gave the eulogy, his voice steady even as tears ran down his face. "Frank Wilson was the first person to believe I could be better than my past," Will said to the assembled mourners. "He trusted me with the most precious cargo he could carry, the woman who became my wife. Without his faith, I would have died alone in my bitterness. He gave me a chance at life." Eleanor stood beside him holding Thomas, while Grace clutched her skirt and thought about the chain of kindness that had led to this moment. Frank had brought her to Will. She had brought healing to the horses. The horses had brought peace to Will, and together they had built something that would outlast them all. The years flowed like water. Grace turned 10, a bright and capable girl who could ride any horse on the ranch, and who helped Eleanor teach the younger children at the school. Thomas at 6 showed his father's gentle way with animals and his mother's quick mind. He could already read and write beyond his years and loved nothing more than helping Will in the barn. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Will surprised Eleanor with a trip to the territorial capital. They left the children with Mary Wilson and spent 3 days in a real hotel, eating in fancy restaurants and attending a theater performance. "I wanted you to know you have not been forgotten," Will said as they danced in the hotel ballroom, "that you are not just a mother and teacher and rancher's wife. You are Eleanor, and you deserve beautiful things." "I have beautiful things," Eleanor replied, looking up at the man she loved more with each passing year. "I have you. I have our children. I have a life I never dreamed possible." But that night in their hotel room, away from the children for the first time in years, they made love with a passion that reminded them both that they were still lovers as well as partners. "You are even more beautiful to me now than on our wedding day," Will whispered as they lay tangled together afterward. How is that even possible? After all these years, Eleanor thought about all they had been through. The fear and joy of Grace's birth, the illness of the horses, and the poverty they had faced. Thomas's arrival, the death of Shadow and Frank, the constant work of building a life together. "Because we have been through so much," she said. "Every challenge we have faced has shown me more of your strength, your kindness, your beautiful heart. How could I not love you more?" They returned home to find the children had made welcome home signs, and Grace had organized a special supper. As Eleanor looked around the table at her family, she felt her heart might burst. "What is wrong?" Mama Grace asked, noticing her mother's tears. "Nothing is wrong, sweetheart," Eleanor assured her. "I am just so happy I cannot contain it all." Will reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Me too," he said softly. "Me too." 2 years later, on a June afternoon, exactly 12 years after Eleanor had first arrived in Silver Creek, she stood on the porch watching her family. Grace, now 11 going on 12, was in the corral teaching a group of younger students to ride. Thomas, 8 years old, was helping Will repair a fence. The school had grown to 20 students, and the ranch had 55 horses, including Hope the colt born that fateful night, now a magnificent 4-year-old stallion. Eleanor was 40 years old. Her red hair was threaded with silver, and there were lines around her eyes from years of smiling into the Montana sun. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw something she had never seen in Philadelphia. She saw a woman who was loved, who mattered, who had built something lasting. Will came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" Eleanor leaned back against him. I am thinking about how far we have come. How 12 years ago I stepped off a train with nothing but fear in a carpet bag. And now look at all this. Our life, Will said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Everything we built together. Grace rode past on Daisy, now an old mare, but still steady and gentle. Thomas waved from the fence, his smile bright. In the corrals, the horses moved like living water, healthy and content. Do you ever regret it? Will asked quietly, leaving everything you knew. Coming out here to marry a stranger. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him, not for a single moment. This was always where I was meant to be. With you, the horses knew, Will said, echoing words he had spoken years ago. That first day when they came to hear you sing. They knew you were the one we had all been waiting for. Maybe I was waiting too. Eleanor smiled, waiting to find my home. And did you? Will asked. Find it, Eleanor looked up at her husband. This man who had shown her what love truly meant. Who had been a killer and a father, a broken man, and a healer, always flawed, but always trying to be better. I found more than home, Will. She touched his face, feeling the familiar roughness of his jaw. I found everything. As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and rose, Eleanor began to sing. Not for the horses this time, though they lifted their heads to listen. Not for her children, though they stopped their work to join in. She sang for the sheer joy of it, for the beauty of this moment, for the life she had built note by note, day by day, song by song. Will's deep voice joined hers, harmonizing as they had learned to harmonize their lives. Grace added her clear soprano. Thomas chimed in with his boyish tenor. And the horses, those beautiful, damaged, healed creatures, added their voices in soft nickers and whinnies. This, Eleanor thought, was what happiness sounded like. What home felt like. What love looked like when it was given freely and received with gratitude. She had come to Montana territory with nothing but a worn carpet bag and fading hope. She had found a cowboy haunted by his past and horses haunted by theirs, all of them waiting for something they could not name. But Eleanor had given them her voice, her heart, her unwavering belief that broken things could be made whole again. And in return, they had given her everything she had ever dreamed of, and more than she had ever dared to hope for. As the last light faded and the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Will pulled Eleanor close. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be horses to train children, to teach fences to men. But tonight, this moment was perfect. Thomas ran up to them, breathless with excitement. Mama Papa Hope just did the prettiest jump over the rail. You should have seen it. We will see it tomorrow, Will promised, ruffling his son's dark hair. Right now it is time for bed. But I am not tired, Thomas protested. Grace appeared, taking her brother's hand. Come on, Thomas, I will read you a story. As the children headed inside, still chattering, Eleanor and Will remained on the porch. The night air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of wild roses and sage. 12 years, Will said quietly. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. Sometimes like yesterday. It is both, Eleanor said. Every day with you is new, and every day with you feels like coming home. Will turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding night. Eleanor Hayes Brennan, he said, you walked into my life when I was more ghost than man. You brought light to my darkness, song to my silence, hope to my despair. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You saved me too, Will, from loneliness, from believing I was unworthy of love. You showed me that I mattered, that I was enough. You were always enough, Will said fiercely. You were always more than enough. I just had the privilege of being the one to see it first. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 12 years of love, and promised 12 more and 12 after that for as long as they had. Inside the house, they could hear Grace reading to Thomas, her young voice confident and clear. Upstairs, the cradle Will had carved sat empty now, waiting perhaps for grandchildren someday. The photographs on the mantel told their story in frozen moments. Will and Eleanor on their wedding day, Grace as a baby, Thomas learning to walk, Frank Wilson smiling at the camera, shadow grazing in the meadow. A life, Eleanor thought. They had built a life. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and true and full of love. As they stood together on the porch where they had shared so many evenings, Eleanor began to hum. Not a song this time, just a melody without words, something that came from deep in her soul. Will's arms tightened around her, and she felt his chest rumble as he joined in creating harmony. The horses in the corrals grew quiet listening. The night birds paused their calling. Even the wind seemed to still. For one perfect moment, the whole world held its breath to hear the song of two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from their brokenness. Eleanor Hayes Brennan had come to Montana with empty hands and a desperate heart. She had found an outlaw cowboy trying to atone for his sins and a ranch full of damaged horses seeking healing. She had offered them the only thing she had to give: her songs, her courage, her capacity for love. And they had given her everything in return. This was her home. Not the house, though she loved every board and nail of it. Not the land, though its beauty still took her breath away. Home was Will's arms around her, Grace's laughter, Thomas's questions, the horses gathering at the fence, the community they had built, the love they had shared and would continue sharing for all their days. She had been waiting her whole life to arrive here, Eleanor realized. Not just in Montana, but in this moment. This perfect, imperfect, beautiful moment where she stood surrounded by love and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Will pressed his lips to her hair. "What are you thinking?" Eleanor smiled. "I am thinking that 12 years ago I was terrified, lost, alone. And now," and Will prompted gently, "and now I have everything." She turned to look up at him, this gentle giant who had stolen her heart with his kindness and his courage. "Now I am found. Now I am home." They stood together as the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them. Tomorrow would bring its work and its joys and its challenges. But tonight they had this moment of peace, this certainty of love, this knowledge that they had found in each other exactly what they had been seeking. The mail-order bride and the outlaw cowboy. The woman who sang to horses and the man who saved broken things. They had built a legacy that would outlast them both. In the children they had raised, in the horses they had healed, in the community they had helped create, in the love they had shared so freely. And as Eleanor finally let Will lead her inside her hands secure in his, she knew that this was the story she would tell their grandchildren someday. Not about fear or loneliness or desperation, but about hope, about second chances, about two broken people who had found each other and in finding each other had learned to be whole. The house welcomed them home. Their children slept peacefully upstairs. The horses rested in their corrals, and Will and Eleanor, together as they had been for 12 years and would be for all the years to come, climbed the stairs to their room. There would be other challenges ahead, other losses to grieve, other joys to celebrate. But whatever came, they would face it together. The woman who had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, and the man who had waited his whole life without knowing it for her arrival. They had found each other. They had chosen each other. And they had built from nothing but hope and hard work and unwavering love a life worth living. This was their legacy. Not wealth or fame or power, but love. Simple, complicated, beautiful, imperfect love. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.